continuing to grow Holyoke, expanding our tax base, and effectively keeping up with the municipal services people expect.
It all really stems, from the room number one, from the mayor's office, the direction of the city.
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus. And on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, we meet the two candidates running for mayor of Holyoke. The city in western Massachusetts will have its first new mayor in a decade this year. The two candidates on the ballot are Joshua Garcia, currently administrator in the town of Blandford, and Michael Sullivan, a six-term at-large city councilor in Holyoke. Our Pioneer Valley Bureau Chief Paul Tuthill recently interviewed both. We'll start with his conversation with Garcia.
My mother migrated here with my grandmother from the island of Puerto Rico. It was a group of Shriners that brought them here. My mother was a Shriner's kid. They went to the island looking for children with special bone conditions. And so we landed here, and of which where I was born and raised into, right out of Providence Hospital, grew up in South Holyoke, went through the Holyoke public school system, went on to Westfield State University, got my bachelor's and my master's degree, and had the privilege of taking on opportunities that has equipped me with the experience necessary to be a mayor. So when you ask the question, why I want to run for mayor, the straightforward answer to that is to take care of the community that's taking care of my family. When my mother and my family migrated here, we came with nothing. We were a poor family. We were active participants of the social service community in the city to, improve the quality of life for the family. And so it's taking care of my family, and I want to be able to take on a leadership role here in the city so that we can be sure that these opportunities continue and take care of other families that are, that are here looking for a better quality of life.
So what is it about your background and your experiences that you believe best qualifies you to be mayor?
So when I got my master's degree, I have my master's in public administration, I landed a career opportunity at the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, in PVPC. And that's really where my career in local government kicked off. I was the municipal services manager, and I was working with local governments up and down the Pioneer Valley, assessing the internal operations, recognizing where inefficiencies were, and putting together reports with recommendations on how they can improve municipal services and improve quality of life for their residents. And doing that for 5 years, I land a career opportunity at the town of Blandford as town administrator, where I took that experience and was able to put it into more practice in the management role. And so I've been there for a little over 3 years, and I know I often hear on the campaign trail, Blandford's not Holyoke. No matter how large a community is and how small a community is, each of the 351 cities and towns in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts follow the same rules and regulations when managing a local government. And so it's my experiences and the knowledge that I've learned in these different capacities that equip me with the necessary experience needed to be an effective manager for the city. And although a small town with about a $5 million budget, it's still more experienced than a volunteer city councilor who hasn't managed a municipal budget at all.
Holyoke was one of just a few cities in Massachusetts that showed a population decline over the last decade, according to the most recent census. What would you do as mayor to reverse this trend of a declining population in Holyoke?
Well, I think, first and foremost, the Holyoke is its own brand, and what creates a vibrant community is when people feel prideful in the community they live. And so as mayor, I need to do what I can to manage our resources in a way that helps civically engage our community, keeps our community engaged in our local government process, among other community development initiatives, to cultivate pride so people feel good about living in our community. Now, I've been knocking on doors and I've been meeting a lot of new people. Although there's a slight decline, I strongly believe that Holyoke is currently in an uplift. There are people moving into the city already, excited about what's already happening here. They like the urban infrastructure that our city offers. There's certainly opportunities with our geographical position where we are in the region. We're accessible. We have housing is affordable, although that's another discussion. But nevertheless, Holyoke's always committed to, as development comes in, to affordable housing. And so we have cheap energy rates that make us competitive as well. And so these are important elements that are contributing to the greater economic plan for the city of Holyoke. And as mayor, it's going to be important for me to manage the resources that we have to adequately support the departments that are doing the important work. So when we talk about public safety, education, our Office of Economic Development, for example, these departments are very dependent on how well we manage our resources to adequately provide them the support they need to continue to cultivate this upswing so that we're continuing to grow Holyoke, expanding our tax base, and effectively keeping up with the municipal services people expect.
Let's talk about the public schools, which obviously is something that attracts people to a community. The Holyoke Public Schools have been in receivership for about 6 years now. Assuming you would like to see that end, what would you do as mayor to convince the State Department of Education that it's time to return the local schools to local control?
So it's a transition back into local. There's no question. I don't think either of the two candidates disagree that we want local control. Right now, as we speak, thankfully, we do have a receiver, and the receiver before him, particularly Dr. Reich, that has been very collaborative with our school board, although currently serving on an advisory capacity. We do have an experience working with the receiver, collaborating through the benchmarks of which where leads us on a path back to local control. So we're going to keep working on that transition plan. It might not feel like it, and I think that just communication and transparency is important. And so what I want to do as chair of the committee, collaboratively with my colleagues on the school board, as well as the receiver, is to understand what those benchmarks are between now and the next, let's say, 4 years. What are those key benchmarks we need to hit so that we can measure our success and gauge of whether or not we are still on the path to local control. So yeah, no question, we want local control. We're in receivership for a reason, and we just need to do our part to close that gap, and so that we can prove and regain confidence from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, prove to them that we're indeed capable of managing our own school district.
Do you support building a new middle school, a replacement middle school, and would it put a burden on local taxpayers?
I do support it. So the issue is, and this was something I actively advocated for when I was on the school board representing Ward 1. I'm 35 now. I think I was like 23 or 24 at the time. When the school district decided to consolidate and go to this K-8 model, I think that it was a necessary move, temporary move at the time. And what I often explain to people is, picture you're an adult, you have a career, you have your own house, and you're down and out. So you move in with your parents. And in Holyoke, that's what we did with our school. We moved in with our parents, but we never came up with a plan to get back on our feet and get out. So, I think we're in a position now where we've cramped middle school age kids in buildings that weren't suited for the needs of middle school age youth. And so I absolutely do agree without a doubt that we do need a middle school environment. What we need to come to an agreement, and it's like we're already moving in that direction, is how that model is going to look like within the budget parameters available to the city of Holyoke. And from what I've been following to date, it looks like the one middle school model is well within the budget parameters of what's available to us. without putting the additional necessary burden to extra burden to local taxpayers.
What are your priorities for spending the second round of American Rescue Plan Act or ARPA money that Holyoke will be getting, which I believe is in the neighborhood of $17 million?
$14 million. So, yeah, before I talk about the second round, I do want to give credit to current acting Mayor Murphy for doing what he can within the circumstances that he's in to commit the first round. I think there was a lot of need at the moment that just couldn't wait until the next mayor to come in. Would I have committed funds in this first round differently? Sure. I do think that we should have committed some sort of merit pay for our first responders. But nevertheless, we do have to give credit to acting Mayor Murphy for the process he had put forward to commit the first round. I think we have an opportunity in the second round to make up for that, because it is our first responders who still had to come into work and keep up with the public safety needs of our city during the pandemic. And I think that investment is an investment in morale. I think our personnel in our city of Holyoke, our public safety personnel, need to know that their city has their back. I also want to commit funds to rapid recovery efforts for businesses. The businesses are particularly small ones, are the backbone of our economy. And so there's no question that they were, without a doubt, impacted greatly, like every other business, through this pandemic period. So it's going to be important for me to be sure that these businesses, that they know that their local government supports their investment here in the city, so that they can continue to stick around and continue to grow here in what we're calling the rapid recovery transition post-pandemic period. And lastly is there's a lot of talk about infrastructure. I do not disagree at all. We have a crumbling infrastructure, more or less, of which in areas that are not adequately supporting our city's growth. I am very thrilled to know that we do have infrastructure money coming down the pipeline from the federal government. So although, we can commit some funds, it is $14 million, although it sounds like a lot of money. It only takes you so far, but just enough to take care of those immediate emergency needs. And then we can supplement the rest of the work we need to do using that federal funding coming down the pipeline around infrastructure.
You've mentioned a couple of times that there currently is an acting mayor in Holyoke. Because of this interim situation, it was decided that the winner of the election will take office on November 15th. Is that enough time for a transition that typically takes a couple of months?
There's never enough time for anything when it comes to these kind of things. It's the reality that we're dealing with. I mean, I think I'm very thrilled to know it's the 15th and not the very next day after Election Day. We're going to do what we can to have an effective and an efficient transition, but this is local government we're talking about. These are the kind of challenges we're always dealing with. So, whether or not it's enough time, obviously we can always use more time, but quite frankly, we really need to hit the ground running. Right now, any healthy community across the Commonwealth, this is the time when we start our budget process for fiscal year 23. And I want to be able to start that immediately so that we're not running behind into what we have to do to put an adequate, an effective, and an efficient budget so that we can keep up with those quality of life needs for fiscal year 23 starting July 1.
We're in the closing stretch of the campaign now. Early voting is beginning. Vote by mail has been available to people for a while, but Election Day is November 2nd. So focusing on that, what's your message to people to voters who at this point may be undecided? What's your closing argument?
My closing argument for voters who are undecided. I think I want to share with voters that I understand their position. I grew up here. I bought a home here. I'm raising a family here. My kids are in the school system here. And just like many voters, my wife and I often have the same discussions everybody else has. Is this a community where we want to continue to invest? Is this a community where we want to raise our family? Should we put our kids in Holyoke public schools, or should we out of district them or put them in private schools? And I got to say, I've been very fortunate enough to have that flexibility of which I can have that conversation with my wife. But I want voters to know that my wife and I, we chose to stay here in Holyoke. We chose to buy our home here and invest here. And we chose to put our 2 9-year-olds, twins, in the public school system here, because we chose that because ultimately we were able to make that decision to invest here. And I know there are a lot of people who are thinking the very same thing. And so I can't sit here and blame them for that. I understand. I get the many reasons why people make the decisions that they do. But I just want them to know that I hear you. I'm with you. I recognize the quality of life issues that are impacting all of us. I really do think that those quality of life issues are a symptom of a larger problem, and that problem is just simply management. And that's the experience that I have, that I can hit the ground running on day one. There's no learning curves when it comes to Joshua Garcia as mayor. And I'm going to work hard to chip away at those issues so that when families are having those conversations to make those decisions, that we get to a point that they can confidently say, we're going to stay here in Holyoke. We're going to keep our children here in our public school system. We're going to keep our business in Holyoke. We're not thinking about moving, or folks from outside of here wanting to move their business here. I want folks to be in a position where they would make that decision without a doubt. So I'm with you. I hear you, and I'm very much looking forward to work hard for you so that we can all be in a position where we could be prideful about where we are, who we are, and our presence here in the region.
Okay, now let's get to Paul's interview with Holyoke mayoral hopeful Michael Sullivan.
I've been on the city council now for 6 years. Been active on the finance committee and our development and government relations committee. And it's given me a really good insight as to what some of the problems and issues are in Holyoke. I've been a lifelong resident of Holyoke, so I know a lot of it firsthand also, but also from a business perspective and now from a governmental perspective.
What about your experiences on the council, and also you have a business background as well? What about those experiences do you think prepares you to be mayor?
Well, the experience on the finance committee was real eye-opening, and it ties right in with my business background. You know, the mayor of the city is really the CEO, and the cities are incorporated, and that's how I look at it. The voters, the homeowners, the citizens are all the stockholders, and really the city council serves as a board of directors, and the mayor's the chief executive officer. And one thing I learned on the finance committee, all the city council can do is make cuts. It can't propose budget transfers. It can't make interdepartmental transfers or allocations as to how the funds are spent. All the city council can do is cut those back. So it all really stems, from the room number one, from the mayor's office, the direction of the city.
Holyoke is one of just a few cities in Massachusetts that lost population in the last decade, according to the latest census. What would you do as mayor to reverse that trend?
Well, not much. That census only happens once every 10 years, so it's not going to get counted again for another 10 years. Right now, I don't believe that the census was accurate. The participation level was not that great, and we're going to pay the price over the next 10 years.
Yeah, but historically, though, looking back, Holyoke has been losing population. So I guess my question is, what can you do as mayor to make the city more attractive for people to live there?
Well, a multifaceted question. You know, we could start with having more job opportunities, safer streets, a better looking city, but we have to take back control of our schools. We have to provide a good quality education. All the basics. We've really got to get back to basics as a city, as a community.
You mentioned the Holyoke Public Schools, which have been under state receivership for, I think it's about 6 years now. What would you do as mayor to convince the state that it's time to return the school system to local control?
Well, the first thing I'd do to convince the state is start acting as the chairman of the school committee. We have a mayor who is absent from most of the school committee meetings during his entire tenure. This much I can tell the people of Holyoke is that I will never, ever miss a school committee meeting. I'm going to be there. I have had some interaction as a counselor with our DG and our committee, Development and Government Relations, with DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I'd want to find out from them exactly what the metrics are, what the achievable goals are, and what we have to do to meet them.
I've asked the receiver on a couple of occasions just what are the targets, what are the goals that need to be hit in terms of graduation rates and test scores and things like that, and there doesn't seem to be a firm answer to that. Do you get the sense that there is some firm benchmark number out there?
Well, I'll go back to what I said. As chairman of the school committee, I'll be asking DESE that and asking them, and at some point demanding an answer.
Do you support building a new middle school or replacement middle school in Holyoke, and do you think that's something that the city can afford to do without impacting its tax rate?
Yes, I absolutely support that. And once again, I've been on the finance committee. A real bad mistake was made several years ago in the way it was presented to the public. We have bonds right now that are maturing, and the price of one middle school will fit perfectly in with our current cash flow on what we're already paying on bonds that are expiring. So, yes, it can fit in the budget, absolutely, without any increase in taxes.
Holyoke is going to be receiving a second installment, I guess is how to describe it, of the funding from ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, that is going to total, I think, around $15 million. What are your priorities for spending that ARPA money?
I believe we're more in the $17 million range.
Right, because you got the additional allocation from the county side, right? Yeah.
Right. So my priorities aren't the glamorous things people sometimes look for. I mean, we've got a lot of rebuilding to do in Holyoke, and stormwater separation is a big problem that's kind of running under the radar with everybody. We have to do sewer separation, stormwater separation projects. The feds gave us 30 years to get this done, but right now Mother Nature, I believe, due to climate change, is only giving us 15 years, maybe less. But it's part of the infrastructure of the city. You can't build new houses. I mean, we go back to what we talked about with attracting people to Holyoke. You have to have affordable housing, you have to have decent housing, and you have to have room to rebuild. And you can't rebuild or build a new house on a crumbling foundation. And that's what we have. We have miles of water main replacement to do that's gone unaddressed for years. Some of the underground utilities in this city are 120, 150 years old. And we've learned a lot in the pandemic. Fiber optics, fiber is the backbone it should be looked at now as a vital piece of the infrastructure going forward. And we've got to look to increase availability throughout the city and affordability.
So your goal is infrastructure. The city badly needs investment in infrastructure, right?
Badly needs investment in infrastructure, absolutely. And then investments in other programs that are available that will help with the schools, with our youth, with giving young people an alternative to drugs, guns, violence, and stuff. We have some great programs, programs like Enlace Familias, Homework House, the Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, that have become even more integral to our success in both the schools and what we need to do on a street level here in town.
You mentioned building more housing. According to some federal statistics, almost 60% of the housing units in Holyoke are occupied by renters. And almost half of them are considered overburdened, meaning that they're paying more than 30% of their gross income for rent. What can you do to make housing more affordable in Holyoke?
Well, that's a tough one. But the model I like and I think is achievable, and we've proven this, and it's one of the best success stories in Holyoke is the Churchill Homes project, making ownership and the opportunity to have ownership available to more people.
Because there's an interim or an acting mayor in office now, it's been decided that the winner of this election will be taking office on November 15th. Is that enough time for a transition that typically takes a couple of months?
Well, I mean, previous transitions, you have an election normally. You have 3 months, November, December, 2 months. But right now, I'm ready from day one. I've run a large business before. I've been involved in city finances for years now. So for me, it won't be an issue. Mayor Murphy has done an excellent job keeping things together. Right now, whoever is elected won't be taking office until the 15th. And Mayor Murphy's agreed to stay on for a few weeks and help out during that transition because we have to wait for the results to be certified anyways.
What's your closing argument to people who may be undecided at this point? Well,
to take a good look at my lifelong track record here in Holyoke, lifelong member of the community, 30 years of business experience, built my business from the ground up, been involved in youth programs and mentoring for most of my life. The years I've spent on the City Council, and, throughout the decades, just my involvement throughout the city at every level. And I'd like to thank all your listeners out there today, and I respectfully ask for their vote on November 2nd.
Okay, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. If you're eligible, don't forget to vote. And until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.